Friends, colleagues, and presenters of romantic relationships on social media, welcome to another episode of Brain Buzz. We are your hosts. I'm Kyle,
And I'm Drake.
and today we are joined by a social psychologist, a writer at Psychology Today magazine, and associate professor of psychology and department chair at Albright College, Dr. Gwendolyn Seidman. Gwendolyn, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're really looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, so Gwen, we reached out through Twitter amazingly. So I mean, it's not a coincidence that we're going to be talking about social media today, but your work is really really cool. Especially, we're recording 4 days after Valentine's Day, and it's kind of on the top of our heads right now after editing episodes on Valentine's Day. So your work specializes on how couples use social media to present their relationships. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about today?
Sure. So, a lot of my work tries to kind of focus on why people present their romantic relationships the way that they do on social media. A lot of the sort of earlier research was mostly focusing on, what people do and that sort of thing. But there are lots of reasons, why you might post something on social media. It could be because you really want to connect with your partner in some way and express some kind of positive feelings. It could be that you're trying to show off your relationship. It could be that you want to show other people that you're taken or your partner's taken. Or you might have motivations to hide that relationship. You think it's private, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm particularly interested in, is kind of those underlying reasons and whether or not those reasons are kind of related to different levels of relationship satisfaction, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So with this, like, I'm gonna ask a tough question off the bat, and I said I wouldn't do that to you. Actually, it's not even that tough a question. Who am I kidding? So what's going on with the people that want to refuse to post about their partner? What's going on with them? Why are they doing that?
Well, it seems like the reason that they're doing that is often that they are less committed. So people that are less committed, less sure about the future of the relationship, are in fact, less likely to want to put it out there, as well as people who might still be interested in looking around for other people. So it's not a great sign. I'm not saying that everybody obviously want to post about the relationship isn't committed. I'm sure there are other reasons, like just sort of general concerns for privacy, that play into that too.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but on the other hand, it is associated with maybe some not so good things about the relationship.
I was going to ask about the privacy thing because just from my own experience, I don't post much about my relationship on social media because I'm a very private person and my wife is a very private person, and we both have jobs, being as the two of you are as well, being in academia. We don't really want to have, students seeing what's going on in my own personal life, right? So I wonder, how do you balance that, or what would you say to somebody who wants to be private but is in a very loving and committed relationship? How do you distinguish those features in your studies?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, is that in the studies we're sort of measuring all these different motives, and I haven't really tapped into sort of general privacy concerns. Like, I'm sure that that's part of it, because it's not like this correlation between not wanting to show your relationship and lack of commitment is gigantic. It's a significant correlation. It's there. So there's obviously other things that explain what's going on with that motive. And so I do think I'm certain, because I haven't measured it, that yeah, a lot of people just don't like to do that kind of thing. I'm also like that. I post very little personal stuff in general on social media for partially the same reason. It's you don't want people seeing certain things, and that sort of thing. And people might just feel like it's not appropriate or whatever. So I think that it's definitely not like a bad sign necessarily. I would say it would probably be a particularly bad sign if somebody was posting other kinds of things that seemed to be of a personal nature, but yet somehow this was not there. If
Right.
it's characteristic of the way they usually use social media.
All right.
Sure, yeah. If they're posting other rather private or intimate details about themselves, but not about their partnership, then that would be cause for concern then.
Yeah, so I'd be more concerned if it was inconsistent with the rest of their, presentation.
Sure, yeah.
So what have you researched within this? Like, why are people posting online? Why do you post online about your partner? Or why do you post pictures? However often you do. Why are we doing it?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. You actually just had Gary Lewandowski on your show, and he was talking about like another reason, which was like attachment insecurity, which I haven't really studied. But there is evidence that people might sometimes do it as a way to compensate for a weaker relationship. In some of my research, I was really trying to kind of suss out the difference between those things, and a lot of this actually came from even interactions with my own, undergraduate students who I was doing research with. They would be, kind of surprised to find out that a lot of the research was showing that couples that posted a lot of stuff on social media were actually like very satisfied with their relationships and committed, because they had this attitude of like, oh my God, I hate it when these annoying people are posting about their relationship. It's so gross. And there actually is other research that shows that people do, in fact, like find that gross if people are really mushy gushy about their relationship. So people don't like that. And one of the things that I was trying to do in this work with a former student of mine, Amanda Havens, who graduated a long time ago, so long that it makes me feel old, I guess, but she was interested in that. And we looked at the difference between behaviors that were just sort of posting pictures of myself with my partner, posting things about my partner, posting stuff on what was then the Facebook wall about my partner. And then we had stuff that we called like excessive displays. We had a hard time naming that, but we were trying to think about stuff that was a little bit more over the top. And we didn't want to ask people, are you over the top? But we basically kind of asked them, how often do you post the kind of information about your relationship or partner that, might be potentially embarrassing? Or how often do you post stuff on your partner's wall that you might not be comfortable saying, in person, or content that shows more affection than what you're normally likely to express in public? So these questions were sort of very specific about doing things online that weren't reflective of your sort of offline way of being, in terms of your relationship. And that goes back to, I think, your first question too about privacy. That if I'm the kind of person who posts nothing personal on Facebook, then the fact that my relationship isn't up there doesn't tell you anything, right? But it's more, is this inconsistent with what I normally do? So we were kind of trying to get at that match between, the public and private there. And we basically found that people who engaged in those kinds of displays were actually less satisfied. People who were engaging in just generally posting about the relationship, that was positively correlated with satisfaction. So it might be, and that I think ties in well with the attachment anxiety idea. If I'm doing this out of a place of, insecurity, then it's going to mean something different. And so even if something might look the same to an outsider who's judging it, says, oh, that's a corny post about your partner, what's going on inside, might depend on whether or not that really is an accurate reflection of how those people usually interact or present themselves in public.
Right. I'm thinking of like, when you say excessive displays, it just kind of makes me chuckle, because I think everybody can kind of relate to either, one couple that they have on their Facebook page or their Instagram page that's always posting these things. Or maybe multiple couples. I mean, there might be a lot of people on your pages, who knows? But I'm curious, you saying excessive displays and not specifically being like, oh, do you think it's excessive is really important, right? Because they might think that, writing a what is it, a love sonnet or whatever, like a soliloquy for their partner online with pictures of them making out is appropriate, right? So I mean, like, I'm curious as to what kind of outcomes you're curious about, because I'm thinking of these, so we talked a lot about, on Gary's episode, we talked about this attachment style and how, it's compensating for something that's bad. What about, the social aspect? We'll get back to the relationship itself, but what about the social aspect of, putting off your followers or your friends? Like, is there something that's being done on that to see, like, are people being rated less desirably as a person if they're doing those things?
Yeah. I mean, I only know of like basically, I think one study. I'm not saying there aren't more. I know of one study that I think I was talking about before that looked at how people responded to those kind of social media posts. And it was like an experiment where they showed you sort of hypothetical fake posts. And for people that were coupled, like if they had some relationship stuff, like they had a couple photo as a profile photo, that sort of thing, then people actually perceived them more positively. So people who were coupled but then had no trace of their relationship at all, like a single photo and no relationship status, people actually thought less of the person. Maybe they thought they weren't really somebody who cared about their partner or something, as opposed to someone who just wants privacy, right? But they actually rated that person lower. But somebody who had really like over the top kind of lovey-dovey posts about their partner, they also disliked that person too. So it was like there's like a where you're showing that you really are like I guess fulfilling the good social role of being in a relationship and having your little couple photo, but you're not being gross about it. And I think that's kind of what that research suggests.
I love the gross, how you as the professional say gross, because it
Yeah.
works so perfectly in this situation. I think, and is this kind of just like the new age PDA that's going on here that we're kind of experiencing?
What do you mean, just like a generational thing?
Yeah, I mean, a the new PDA where it's like your public displays of affection, where it used to be making out on the bus, now it's you're making out on my page, and I don't want to see it while I'm scrolling through Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that would be interesting because I actually don't know. I don't think there's actually a ton of research on any kind of like PDA, even what you're talking about, like the sort of making out of the bus kind of thing, and what's behind that, and is that really the PDA on the bus that you're looking at, is that unbridled, uncontrollable passion, or is that people just trying to show off or make other people uncomfortable? Like, I'm not really sure why people engage in that. I mean, I think with the Facebook stuff or the social media stuff, I wouldn't say it's unbridled passion because you don't just spontaneously post something. You think about it. You choose to put it up there. But
Very much curated.
But I would say like some people's idea of what's quote unquote gross, is different than other people's, so, all of us here were saying we're kind of more private. So we probably have a pretty low bar for like, this is too much. I don't need to see this, whereas other people might think like, oh, that's really sweet. So I think people have a different bar for what they think is appropriate. As far as people doing it, I think it probably tracks the same thing. I think if you're somebody who thinks like, oh, what are you talking about? This is just nice. This is great, that you're much more likely to do it, and post those kinds of things. So it is kind of, as you said, a new way to have kind of PDA.
Gross people out, yeah. Even if not around them. I think
it also depends on the audience too, because one of the things that's really tough, like doing this kind of research, is these platforms are changing all the time. And, a lot of the earlier research was on Facebook, and you would find undergraduate students posting lots of personal stuff on there. Whereas now Facebook is where everybody is. And that's where your mom and your grandma and your aunts are on there. And so young people aren't going to be posting things that might be embarrassing and stuff like that on Facebook. And so it's, you kind of have to ask about other social media in general, but then you're not sure which platform you're asking about at that point. But Facebook is like something everyone has, but younger people just don't disclose as much on it as they used to.
That actually brings me to a question that I have for you, and I'll make this a two-parter. So, does the platform matter? So, do we see differences between, say, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever the kids are using? Like, are there differences between them? And if you had to say just off the top of your head, hey, the way that they show something on Facebook is going to be different than Instagram, do we have to duplicate our research in each platform, or are there commonalities between them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something I think about a lot, even when I'm like reviewing other people's papers, because sometimes I'll see researchers saying, let's look at this thing on Instagram, or let's look at this thing on Facebook. And, I do think it matters. I think it matters not so much because of features of the site, because they're all kind of doing the same thing. I think it really is what people think their audience is. And so, Facebook, as I said, a lot of that's like extended family. Instagram, I think, tends to go a little bit more toward potential public stuff, a little bit more like Twitter. Like you might have followers who you don't know personally. And then, there might be other platforms that are a little bit more personal. I know everybody used to be really into like Snapchat for a while, but I feel like that went away. It's hard to keep up with these.
I literally uninstalled Snapchat the other day. I was like, nobody's using
over.
this.
It's over.
We're showing your generation here.
But one of the problems with studying this area, like a real challenge, is that these platforms change all the time. And so you'll have even questionnaires that are used will have terminology that refers to a specific site, or even the way a site used to be set up. Like I use the word Facebook wall. That's not like what they call it anymore. So it really ends up being difficult to kind of connect different streams of research or use the same measures and even adequately compare these platforms, because you end up asking different questions about them because they have different features. But I really think a big part of what you want to think about is not so much like which platform, because of what I was just saying, but more try to understand, what do people think their audience is for that platform? And I think that's going to be the more important predictor. Is this something my parents are seeing? Is this something that the whole world is seeing? Is this something for my friends? And that's where you're going to see, I think, different levels of inhibition, in terms of what you're going to post.
Yeah. The other thing that came to mind was you said, talking about having family on Facebook and maybe you wouldn't post certain things. I don't know what it's called. Maybe Drake knows. I don't. Maybe you do, Gwendolyn. But what is it called when somebody has like a second account, like a secret account they use? They post it. It's their burner account? Is it just their burner account?
That's what I call it.
I didn't know the phenomenon. I didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah, so like I think about the fact that I've got family members on Facebook, and again, I don't post anything anywhere basically. I post the occasional photo of dinner that I've made, or breakfast, or a meal or something, but that's about it. But
Kyle's got a burner account, is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I have a burner account where I post all the saucy photos. but like, is that a common thing for people, or is it a consideration that you have to make when you're doing this kind of research, and say to yourself, okay, I'm asking about their primary account, or I'm asking about their secondary account, or does that factor in at all to some of this work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I usually ask people, as I said, I've kind of moved away from saying, let's just look at Facebook or whatever because of some of those problems. So I'll often ask, like, what's your primary account, the one you use the most? And then I hope that that's kind of, tracking that sort of thing. I mean, obviously it still might not, because there's so many fine-tuned kinds of distinctions here. And a lot of people still say, like in general populations, that their main one is Facebook, because I think among people that are not college students, that's still the most popular one. It's just with the college student populations, they're usually using other stuff. But I'll ask what the primary is, and then ask them to answer all the questions with respect to that one. But it's a little tricky because then, again, it's a little apples and oranges. So the other approach that I've seen done is also to just ask about a specific one. But then the problem is, again, if it's not the primary, if you're asking about Facebook and the person barely uses it, I'm not sure what that really says about the way they present themselves. If it's like, oh, that's the one I don't use. So sure, I post one thing every 3 months. So I prefer the sort of pick one approach, even though it's less precise, because I guess I feel like I'm tapping into more of whatever it is that they, whatever they actually do on social media, as opposed to how they use some marginal site. But obviously there's issues with that approach too. So hopefully with both approaches in there, we can arrive at some kind of truth.
Yeah, it makes sense to sort of be, because what you're trying to look at is overarching themes. It makes sense to be, I don't want to say less precise, but be a little bit more accepting of other sources of social media engagement that people are after, right? So that totally tracks with me. Yeah.
Gwendolyn, I have a couple more questions before we get into the actual results. I know I do want to talk about the results of your study and the motives behind why people are posting this, because I think that's really cool. I think that's the biggest part of this. But there's just so many questions related to why people are doing these things and how to do it effectively. So I'm curious to just get your perspective, even if it's speculative. What are like the worst, I guess, worst pictures slash posts that you can be making as a couple? Like, if someone were to come to you as the researcher, as the expert on this, what would you say to hold off on when it comes to posting about your partner?
Yeah, I would say anything. I think that's overtly sexual, I think, is a problem. People are going to find that inappropriate. I would say that even though certain things might be borderline in terms of just sort of being affectionate or kissing your partner on the cheek, I guess I would be, it's just my own personal opinion, more cautious about that kind of thing, because I feel like you're more likely to make enemies than friends. Maybe that's just me. I have this thing I say about myself, or one of the reasons I don't post a lot on social media is because when I see other people's stuff, there's like a 10% chance it raises my opinion of them, maybe 50% chance it does nothing, and 40% that it lowers it. So I just feel like you're better off not. maybe I'm just really judgmental, but that's sort of. So I feel like you're better off not posting something.
You're opening yourself up for judgment at that point, right? It makes sense. Yeah.
So I think with the relationship stuff, I think it's, yeah, you want to have, like I said in the beginning, sort of some acknowledgments. People don't think like, hey, where the heck's your spouse? Like, why are they not anywhere on any of your photos or anything like that? That might look a little weird to people. But I think that beyond that, you're taking the risk of annoying people, like you were saying before. Some people don't, particularly if it's something like a happy anniversary, something like that. I think that's fine. But if it's these sort of, love poems and things like that you feel like, that could have been done in private sort of thing. Whereas something like, the happy anniversary, that's the kind of thing you would be celebrating with other people anyway. So I think you want to think about, like, would I say this in front of other people? Like, would I recite a homemade love poem to my partner in front of everyone we know?
Yeah.
Or not?
Read out like a cocktail party to your partner in front of everybody.
I think people would do that. I don't know. I guess the whole vows thing, but it's like, would you just spontaneously, break out in song about your partner in front of other people? That's the question. And it's, so I think that you want to sort of use that level of discretion on social media also.
Yeah, and I think this is why we kind of, we got onto this topic, and we ended up speaking with you and getting you on the podcast was because of Valentine's Day, right? And that's like, you say, you get your vows, that makes sense to read out loud in front of people. But again, Valentine's Day is that kind of online version where you're like, okay, you can do a little love letter for your partner. Everybody's going to give you a pass today, right? But how often does posting, those ballads or pictures of your partner, even if it's just a picture of your partner, how often is like too much? I asked this question on Instagram. I'm curious to see what the results are afterwards.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to say, because I feel like a lot of that is really opinion. I'm curious also what people say. Yeah. I think for some people, it's going to be like, oh, you really should not be posting that stuff at all, unless it's like, hey, you're on vacation together or something. Like, why are you just posting this kind of stuff at all? So you have people who have that attitude. Then you have people who are like, oh no, it's fine, just don't do it a lot. So, I don't really know what's normative, I guess, in terms of that. And I'd imagine like people really have different levels of perceptions. I'm kind of curious how your poll turns out.
Well, so far, I'll give you a couple of the quick ones. Some are saying never, that they haven't done that. My mom included. She loves her partner though. It's all good. And then some have said that like they haven't posted since one of the funnier ones is Canada Day 2019 specifically. So there's a lot of variance. Some are weekly, some are not so much, but there's a lot of variance for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's different kinds of things. That's one of the tricky things about when you're kind of looking at this research is what behaviors are you asking about? So having a profile photo with your partner, I mentioned that's like fairly common. Posting like what I was calling excessive displays is actually really rare. There weren't that many people in the sample that we had anyway who said that they did that with any kind of frequency. It was unusual. Thank God. And even just posting in general. I always try to control for how active people are on social media, because obviously if I'm a person who only posts 3 things a year, then I don't post about my partner either. So
Yeah.
that's one of the problems I think with a lot of the research literature is they don't always control for that. So that I'm not sure if I'm just looking at a person who's active on social media or a person who's particularly showing their relationship, and I don't really know how to interpret those results sometimes. So
Right. Yeah. Like, what percentage of your posts are about your couple versus, you could have somebody that posts 10 times a day and they post, maybe once every week about their partner, but then you have someone that posts 3 times a year, like you said, and then they never post about their partner. So that percentage is really important.
yeah, so I think I like when some of the research has actually looked at the percentage. They'll be like, look at your last 10 posts, how many of those mentioned your partner, and I think that's like a better way to do it, because that way you're kind of controlling for just their baseline activity, because baseline activity just differs so much, as everybody knows, right, from person to person, that you really need to have something to compare it to.
Mm-hmm. So Gwendolyn, what are the motives behind engaging in these dyadic like displays or presentations online? Like, what have you found in your work?
Yeah, so we were interested in looking at a bunch of different motives, and we were sort of curious if some of them would be separate motives or not. And it basically turned out that they kind of fell into like 4 categories. So one of those was something that we called communal motives. So that had to do with kind of trying to, get closer to your partner, express caring for your partner, that sort of thing. And all those kind of sentiments just tended to kind of go together. Like people that said they did one of those things, did another. So just showing how much you love your partner, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also this totally separate thing, which was self-enhancing motives. So, trying to create a good impression of yourself by posting about your relationship. So thinking that it would increase your social status or could make people jealous or something like that. So that stuff tended to be, so people who endorsed, those items, they tend to kind of clump together.
Right.
And then we also looked at some stuff that was actually a measure that Kruger and Forrest came out with like last year about protecting your relationship from threats. And in that measure, they looked at 2 kinds of threats. So one of them was like potential rivals. That is, I want to show everybody else that my partner's taken so that nobody tries to like put the moves on them. And then there's also protection from potential suitors. Like I want people to know that I'm taken so they don't come on to me. I actually found that those things were, I would have expected those to be kind of 2 separate motives, but actually they found that people who said they were worried about suitors were also worried about rivals. Like they seemed to track each other in general. So those were kind of the 3 main categories of motives that we looked at. And then we also looked at, I think I mentioned before, this kind of separate category of this privacy thing, like a desire to keep the relationship private, and concern about maybe alienating other people with the relationship. And again, we thought that those might be 2 different things. Like maybe there's a difference between I don't want to alienate other people or make them uncomfortable versus I just don't think it's anybody's business about my relationship. But all that stuff seemed to kind of clump together anyway. It's a kind of one tendency to want to keep it private.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That the suitors and the rivals is such a funny. It's funny to me, but I've seen it in my relationships. I've seen it in other relationships. Where like, well, you're not posting enough about me. How are these girls supposed to know that you're dating somebody? Like it's
right,
like
right.
It happens, and I can definitely see that. And I think you also can have like individuals within those relationships determining whether or not they're posting enough. I'm like within that. Well, my question is more or less on how. I guess it goes back to how often you're doing it, but at the same time, it's like what pictures you're taking. Like we had a Dr. Chris Berry on talking about self-perception and selfies, and so it's coming to my head right now where I'm thinking about like, what if you're just really bad at taking pictures? And like, I know my partner complains all the time about me taking really shitty pictures. And she's like, we don't have any good pictures of each other. I'm like, well, it's because I'm not good at taking pictures and you complain every time. So I'm like, how does that play a role in this too? I'm like, I'm sure it does.
Yeah, it probably does. Like there's so many, that's what's so frustrating about this. There's so many features that like obviously make a difference. Like I don't like the way I look in photos, or I don't take good photos and things like that are going to affect things. And, just difficult in research, as you guys know, to like measure every single possible alternative explanation and have it in there. But it is one of the reasons that you often, I think, don't get really, really, really strong results in general, because when you're looking at something like, well, how much do I post on social media? It's just determined by so many things. We already talked about base rates of posting, but also just, like how comfortable you are with your appearance. There's just so many different kinds of things that are going to influence it. So you have to sort of, whenever we're doing this research, just realize it's not like you're saying, oh, well, if you post, it must be because of like one of these two reasons, or if you don't, it must be because you don't care about these things. Like that's really not how I would ever interpret that research, because otherwise I don't post a lot. So this says terrible things about my own relationship, according to my
so you're saying that the Instagram, Facebook, they shouldn't have like a warning before you post a picture, like, are you sure you want to post another couple picture this week? Like, they shouldn't be doing that. I completely agree with you. I think so your work on this, you talk about this investment model. Do you want to explain what this investment model is? I think it's awesome. I think it's a really cool concept.
Yeah, so the investment model is it's one of these real kind of classics in relationships research. So I guess you guys are more like health psych people, I guess.
He's a cognitive. I'm
no,
a health.
not even
cognitive. Okay, cognitive. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to characterize you.
No, this is why it's always fun. I learn so much doing these episodes because it's so far outside of what I spend time on. So this is great. I'm just enjoying listening.
So just make fun of us for having like a worse replication crisis than you guys do. Like...
Nobody has a worse replication crisis than we do.
Okay. So anyways, the investment model, like I was saying, is one of these really well-known theories proposed by Carol Rusbolt, and it basically tries to kind of understand relationship commitment. And so the idea is that people often think intuitively, like, oh, I'm going to be more committed in my relationship if I'm happier with it, if it's more satisfying, more rewarding, doesn't have a lot of bad stuff going on. And that's true, but what she was interested in was kind of taking like an economic approach to it, and sort of a cold, calculated kind of way of looking at what really determines commitment. It's not just about how happy you are. And so the investment model looks at your level of investment, which is kind of how much you've put into the relationship or would stand to lose if it broke up. So if you imagine if you have children, right? So you have more to lose, right? If you were to end that relationship, or even just the fact that you've spent years of your life, and energy and money and time putting into the relationship, that's going to make you more committed, regardless of how good the relationship is. And then the third element that goes into commitment is quality of alternatives. That is, how well do you think you could do outside of your current relationship? So is being single better than my current relationship, or are there other partners out there that are better than my current relationship? And those things all contribute to satisfaction. So it can explain why unsatisfying relationships can stay together, because if you think you can't do any better, right, or you have invested a lot, you still might feel like this is the best thing you've got going on and you stay committed, or you could have a pretty good relationship, but you think, hey, I could still do better and I'm not very invested in this. And that makes you less committed. So that's kind of the basic sort of theoretical background. That's obviously not my thing. It's like the most famous things in my field. But that's
what you're attaching to the social media, engagement is based on that investment model. Predicting those outcomes.
Right. So we were kind of trying to understand, like, how do these motives for presenting your relationship on social media connect to some of those elements, satisfaction, investment, alternative quality. And basically, so we had, if you remember our motives from before, so we had those communal motives, which were like wanting to show affection and love for your partner. And those were associated with both satisfaction and investment. What was interesting was the relationship protection motives, like keeping rivals away from you or your partner. That was associated with investment, but actually not with satisfaction when we had everything in the model together. So some of the past research had shown it was related to satisfaction, but when we put everything in together, statistically, it turns out that investment was really what better explained that. And not satisfaction. Because obviously all of these things are related to each other, like investment and satisfaction are correlated. But basically, it was really more of a sign that you were invested in that relationship, as opposed to that it was a particularly good one way or the other. And then the self-enhancing motives really did not connect to satisfaction or investment, and in fact connected to quality of alternatives and like a lack of commitment. So if you're there posting about your relationship because you want to show off or look good, that was actually a sign of maybe something not so good for the stability of your relationship.
Right.
And we mentioned before that the privacy motives also were associated with thinking you had other high quality alternatives and less commitment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense to me. Like the idea of like whenever we're talking about the relationship protection motives, if you're trying to like show that you're with a partner just to protect from possible suitors for your partner or from yourself, I mean, I don't see why that would be predicting satisfaction in the relationship. But by posting more, it's showing that you are invested in the relationship and willing to do that. I think every time I think of self-presentation, I think of and like breakups and relations. I think of like you're in a relationship and it's not going very well, and then your partner out of the blue starts working out every day and eating healthy for a month. And they start posting more pictures online of themselves. And I think of that, right? And I think of how you present yourself online and how the couple presents themselves online, right? So I mean, it's a really interesting dynamic of posting with your partner and not posting with your partner, and having that kind of those motives that are driving that behavior.
Yeah. And it makes sense that if you are looking for alternatives, that you're going to be not posting about your relationship, or if you are, you're going to be doing it in a way that's more self-enhancing as opposed to something that's expressing love for your partner or whatever. That's obviously not why you're doing it.
I was just about to ask about that sort of self-enhancement component. Like, do you see, like Drake mentioned, obviously, working out, getting in shape, doing whatever it is to sort of enhance your capital when you enter the free market, but do people, or do you have evidence, or would you even speculate on this? Like, do people ever self-enhance in such a way that they say, like, look at all the nice things I'm doing for this person that I'm about to leave, and this could be you in a month or whatever? Like,
interesting in that context. I mean, it does make sense to self-enhance in general by showing off that you're such a great partner and that sort of thing. Like, obviously, there is a reason to do that. The question is, I mean, as a good follow-up study is like, how do other people react to it? I mean, there's a whole kind of other area of research on, mate poaching and that sort of thing. And this idea that, when someone has been in a successful relationship before, it makes them more desirable because you're like, oh, this is somebody that someone else actually liked. This was a good person to be with. This is episode, I'm going to show my age now, Seinfeld. If you guys ever watched Seinfeld.
Of course, yes.
Okay, all right. Making sure.
Yeah, definitely.
The other one where George basically takes this photograph of a professional model and goes to these nightclubs and says, like, this is my ex-fiance who died, and then suddenly he's able to get all these models interested in him. So I guess it's kind of silly, but it's the idea is like he's showing some kind of like proof that he's desirable, by the fact that someone else wanted a relationship with him. So, I think it's kind of like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's hilarious. I think of other ways of self-enhancement that I think of is like when your partner's like, you take a couple pictures and they look good and they really look good in one, and you look awful in that picture, and they're like, I'm gonna post that picture anyway because it makes them look really good, but you not so much, right? And so I think it's just
right.
Really
What's another one? Yeah. On the other hand, you might want your partner to look good because you want to show off that your partner was good looking. I mean, that was an area I was actually interested in a separate study, and we had a really hard time kind of sussing it out. We were looking at narcissism in particular, and we thought that people who were narcissistic would be more likely to post stuff about their partner if they at least thought their partner was good looking. But we actually didn't find evidence of that. And then we even tried an experiment where we said, here, imagine this person's your partner. And we showed a picture of an average or good looking person. And there still wasn't a difference in how likely they were to share it. The only thing we found was that in the people who were in the good looking partner condition, we said, oh, here's a couple photos of your partner. And one of them was like them like in a bathing suit. One of them was them in regular clothes. And we found that narcissistic people were more inclined to post those like sexy photos if they have the good looking partner. So they were showing sort of some sense, some tendency to kind of show off the partner, but it wasn't as much as I would have expected. So I don't know if it was just the way that we had assessed that. Because I thought, because obviously there's a little bit of paradox there, because it's like showing off that partner could take attention away from me, the narcissist, or it can make me look good because it's like a trophy. So I don't know if those things end up like canceling each other out.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's interesting. It's almost like you need a strong enough effect, and like, okay, interesting. That's really cool. I'm sorry, I'm just like processing this.
I just figured out I feel like they canceled each other out, the two tendencies. I'm not sure like how to capture, one or the other.
Yeah, some weird quadratic kind of thing or something.
I'm curious too about how gender plays a role in that too, because thinking about posting your partner in a more sexy light. Do men do that more? Were the men doing that more than the women? Because I think
I imagine they would. I mean, most people in that study, and these were undergrads, actually said that they would not be inclined to post that bathing suit photo of their partner. So most people felt that was a little like, so if you actually look at the means, I mean, people were like much more likely to pick the clothes photo, even though the bathing suit photo was obviously like attractive, but it was like, that's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm trying to remember, I looked at the data, but I think that the men may have done that a little more. The sample was very gender skewed because it was undergrads. And it was psych. So, you know what happened.
70-30.
So we may have had stronger effects had we actually had, some more men, because they might be a little bit more inclined to think about their partners like a physical trophy, whereas women might be more inclined to like not want people to think that like they weren't good looking enough for their partner or something. But yeah, I don't know. That's just speculation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
quick question here. How would something like consent play a role in that? Like, did you evaluate for consent, or was that explicitly stated when it was like, oh, here are the two photos, your partner is allowed or consented to you posting them, or was that not?
We probably should have asked that. We didn't. We just kind of had like one question of like, hey, how likely would you be to choose one of these photos or whatever? But that was it. It didn't really say anything about whether or not the partner was cool with it. And I think you're right that, we probably would have seen certainly higher rates of endorsing the photo. Like if we explicitly said your partner is cool with this photo and doesn't mind if you post any of these, or something like that, not really explicit. I mean, for the follow-up, I should write this down. For the follow-up study, we should include that bit in the instructions.
When I hear these studies, I'm always so fascinated, and I immediately go into like, and I won't say problem-solving mode, but like explanation mode, and I just like immediately start kind of coming up with ways in which we could find some effect, or So sorry for
good. It's a good suggestion. I said I'm going to put it in a mental notebook for the next one. You get very low endorsement of willingness to post that photo. And so maybe if we explicitly said, hey, the partner's okay with it.
Yeah, just a little edit as well, for our non-psychology research viewers, which is most of them. Most psychology studies are predominantly, whenever they're undergrad populations, are predominantly female. I think that's what Kyle was referring to as a 70-30, which is 70% female, 30% male. And that's just kind of the breakdown of psychology in most universities. But yeah, that aside, I love the work that you're doing on this. I know Gwendolyn, you're a Psychology Today blogger, and you've done some really cool stuff on dating in COVID. And I feel like we'd be silly not to mention COVID in this episode. So what
just like all the other ones,
because like we're just pretending it's not existing, and that makes us happy. But
I don't know if anybody's heard of this pandemic that we're dealing with. Have any of you been experiencing this?
Comment in the comment box.
Isolated thing.
This is the first time you're hearing about it.
Yeah.
Just let us know. It'd be great to know. But so
I'm moving wherever you're living.
Yeah, I would love to go there. Why not? So anyway, back to how do we do, like, what's changed in this? Because this is something that I've been loving to talk about, especially with anybody that's doing relationship research, and how has it really impacted dating? Because we all know it has. Being in lockdown and not being able to see everybody you used to see.
Yeah, so certainly for dating, I mean, it's affected people in existing relationships. I think probably dating even more. I mean, so many of the ways that people would meet people just basically disappeared because
Yeah.
of lockdown. And and not even just the fact that you can't meet people, but people that are single who live alone are missing a lot of their social contacts. So they may actually have even more of a need. Because you might think, oh, I'm single, I have friends, we go out, it's cool. I don't need to be dating all the time or looking for a relationship. But, if you imagine like being single and living alone during lockdown, that's a really different situation than just regular single life. And so I would think people would be more likely to want to date, and both out of just that boredom thing, but also I think that just major crises and things like this, cause a certain kind of like existential angst, have people kind of reevaluating their priorities in life and their goals for themselves, their family. And so you're single, and it might have you reevaluating, like, wait, maybe I really do want a relationship, and suddenly thinking about that stuff more. Because there's a lot of other research in social psych, that shows that, when people sort of are reminded of death, like literally like in lab studies, you remind them of death, that it makes them have more of this kind of crisis of meaning. And I just feel like the pandemic's like an everyday reminder of death. So the big terror management theory, the theory is called experiment, long-term, longitudinal one. So I think that's going to affect people's, way they see their relationships, whether that's people that are currently in one, but also, if you're single and thinking like, hey, maybe I really do want somebody. So I think you're going to get both kind of that more serious thing, and then also that I'm bored, so I'm going to go on Match. So I think you're going to probably have both. I know that the dating sites had a huge increase in users like during lockdown, as you would probably expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned it before we went on to the show. You talked about how Match.com has a lot of survey data that they've collected since COVID's happened. They routinely do this. But I wanted to mention a couple stats that I thought were hilarious, and just kind of we could talk about them if you like. So 26% of singles are people that are single. They're calling them singles. Broke up due to stay-at-home orders. So they like a quarter of people that were together at the beginning of COVID broke up because of the stay-at-home orders. And some couples are actually trying. Like, I think that's crazy, first off, but I was one of those people that experienced just that. Like, I mean, so like, it's not insane for me to believe that it's like kind of like a Tinder box in a way. And I like to use Tinder box for a reason, like because the Tinder's really popular right now and a lot of people are using it. But a lot of people are really, in situations.
Thanks for explaining the joke.
That is good.
I try my best. For those people that don't know what Tinder is, dating app. I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. That I actually am surprised it's not more. But I mean, I guess that's like a quarter is a lot of relationships.
A quarter is pretty high. I mean, what's interesting is there's a whole bunch of data on like divorce, and actually, divorce actually went down a little bit. It's hard to say why, because it might be that, going to the divorce attorney and all that and doing that in the middle of a pandemic is kind of tricky. But the studies on relationship satisfaction don't necessarily show that, at least in established couples, that it's going down. It's more that couples that already have problems had a decline. And couples that were doing well, actually, a lot of them did better. They actually got closer. They spent more time together. They, I think you kind of get to know the person better, or suddenly you're seeing your spouse at work, and you're kind of having all these like shared experiences, and you can sort of appreciate maybe more, what your spouse does, both at home and at work. And so couples that were doing well, like it was an improvement. Couples that had problems and tensions and stuff beforehand, as you can imagine, it was not a good thing. So it's kind of like that phrase, rich get richer, poor get poorer kind of thing. So people that already had good relationships did well. So I think when you're talking about some of these maybe newer relationships, so those are going to, of course, be less stable than the kind of like marriage type relationships I was talking about. So more of those are probably going to break up at some point anyway, if they've only been together for, several months or something like that. So they were probably already unstable, and they're probably going to break up later anyway. So maybe you should feel okay about your breakup. felt
I
like
feel,
handle
I
this.
feel great. I feel great. It's
We already
honestly
feel
maybe it
good.
just sped up the process, and that's what I've been saying to a lot of people too. You know, friends and family. I mean, if it's happening to quarter relationships. There's a lot of people that are breaking up and seeing a lot of change in their lives because of the stress, and maybe it just sped up the process that was inevitable in that point. And I think that's really cool. Another stat from this that I really like it just blows my mind, but I asked it, it's not crazy at all. 25% of singles had an ex reach out to them during the pandemic, and it didn't always stop at messaging, they say. So over 1 in 10 singles actually rekindled.
Spicy.
1 in 10 rekindled that relationship, which is just, it hurts me. It hurts me to see everybody going back to their exes like that.
We're getting a lot of insight into Drake's personal life in
I
this
know.
episode, and I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Gwendolyn, as somebody who is in a stable, committed relationship,
I am too
Drake
right
is my
now.
outlet for seeing the world. Well, I know you are. No, I know you are. I don't mean to cast aspersions.
I got a little more
But
turbulation than Kyle.
Drake lives. Yeah, you're my source of entertainment on the dating front.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Anyways, so Drake, was that 1 in 10 of the 25%, or was that not made clear?
It said 25% of singles had an ex reach out to them during the pandemic, and it said over 1 in 10 singles actually rekindled a relationship with their partner. So I mean, I'm assuming it's 1 in 10 to 10%. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Not 10%
Yeah.
of the 25.
That's
25.
Yeah, I mean, I actually am not at all surprised that people would reach out to exes. I mean, first of all, you've got that whole, I'm bored, I'm doing all this online stuff. But also, I think, like I was saying before about the whole like existential crisis thing. And it's like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have broken up with that person. Like I got to kind of reevaluating your life and your goals and thinking like, maybe that relationship was, maybe that was the person I should have been with, and I think the other thing is that, typically when you're meeting new people, you want to kind of keep things light and flirty and that sort of thing. Like you don't bare your soul to people normally. You're not comfortable doing that necessarily. So I think that people might have felt this need to connect and thought, I don't want to go meet some new person on some dating app. And I was totally stressed about like COVID, my job, and I'm going to start confiding in some random person. I don't want to do that. And so here's this ex. We already have a rapport. We already have intimacy. I can go ahead and do that, and get that benefit from that relationship again. So I think, whether that resulted in rekindling or not, but I think certainly it would explain why you might want to reach out. So both that kind of, maybe I really do want to get back together, kind of reevaluating your goals, but also just, I want to connect with somebody. I'm stressed out right now. I'm not in the mood for like light flirtation, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You're going to cut the middleman out and just kind of get right into that comforting relationship again.
Go back to what you know.
Absolutely. And so the last one that I think is, building on this, we're doing it perfectly here, just building on our conversation. But nearly 1 in 4, so 25% seems to be the number here, of singles had sex with a non-romantic roommate in the past 6 months, and then they said 46% of Gen Zers and then 33% of millennials. So those are driving the numbers there. So it's showing that, people are not really, maybe they're just missing sex and they just want to, have sex, and the roommate's like the only person that's there. So like, I'm not romantically attached to you, but this is what I have for options, right? So that's a lot though, 25%.
Yeah, it was higher than I would have predicted. Like if you had asked me before I saw that stat, I would have thought, okay, some people will do that. I just feel like that kind of surprises me because it's not even just your comfort with casual sex, but the fact that you're attracted enough to the person as well to do that and aren't concerned about how it affects your relationship or whatever. So, or even have a roommate that's, that's like, I don't know, was it only among people who had a roommate that was like of the sex they would have sex with, or was it just like all people?
It says nearly 1 in 4 singles had sex with non-romantic roommates. I would assume that would be if they had non-romantic, like out of people that had non-romantic.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think like a lot of people just are heterosexual and have a same-sex roommate. Whereas I feel like if that went on, that would be an even more impressive stat.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be a really impressive stat. You know? They're like, I'm no longer I'm no longer playing by my sexual orientation because I miss sex that much. Like that would be a very impressive stat.
Like this is like the prison thing. You know, it's what happens in
exactly.
right? So
and sometimes it does feel like a
COVID.
in my head.
What is it? Like is it the Kinsey scale? Is that?
Yeah. There's like that.
And
are you totally?
Yeah. Or just like the pandemic has completely moved people on the.
You're just sliding down the scale.
Yeah. For those that are aware,
those are some mind-blowing stats.
That was one of the most shocking. I feel like I definitely would not have predicted such a high number.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no,
sorry,
absolutely.
The Kinsey scale.
Just
Kinsey
to
scale,
clarify,
right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to clarify this Kinsey scale, from my memory, it's a scale from 1 to whatever of being very heterosexual to being very homosexual, and then figuring out where you are in that boundary. Just so anybody's curious, it's a dated scale, but it's like people have used it to see how heterosexual or homosexual you were in nature by orientation. I think that's an appropriate way to say it.
Anyways. I think so. Don't ask me. This isn't my. I don't do this work. I don't know. I find those numbers really, really fascinating. This is the first time I'm hearing them. Drake's obviously looked before we started recording, and Gwendolyn, you were obviously privy to them quite a while back. But those are some really astounding findings.
Yeah, especially that last one. I mean, the X thing, I did not surprise me. I thought the X thing, I can totally see that. The roommate thing surprised me more. I mean, that I guess people really, really wanted that connection. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it suggests there's really maybe a high level of feeling of isolation, among people who are single. And there was actually some study I was just heard presented at a conference just last week about how single people were, much more happy being single, if they were having sex. I guess it's not too surprising. But single people who were having sex were not that happy with it. So maybe that explains why some of these people were getting out there and they weren't, and they just thought, I'm miserable, I'm just going to go for the roommate.
Yeah. I mean, it's very insightful. I mean, it's funny that, clearly sex plays a big role in people's happiness in some shape or form, depending on who you are. And it's like, it's curious to see that there doesn't have to be that standard, standard issue monogamous relationship to be getting the same kind of outcomes of happiness, right? But yeah, stressful times. Gotta have sex somehow, and your roommates may be the best option for you. So it's very cool. So Gwendolyn,
good stress release.
Yeah, it's an amazing stress release. That's perfect. What is there anything else that you'd like to touch on before we let you go, Gwendolyn? Because we know we've had this has been a good episode. It's been a long episode. So is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you really think that our viewers would like to hear about the work that you're doing, or dating or relationships in general?
I mean, I guess the one thing I want to say is just the fact that there's still all this uncertainty. So, even the fact that I was like, oh, well, people who don't show their relationship, it's like, oh, they're less committed. And, not to like take anything as, a hard fact, like people who do this are like this kind of thing. And not to like read too much into any individual thing. And obviously all of us do social science research. And so we keep talking about the average person. And that's just like literally like an average, like a mathematical average of people. So whether or not that applies to any actual individual, you have other information about that person. So, you should use that. Don't freak out if your partner's not, posting about you on social media. Look at other variables that about that person. Yeah. So, yeah, otherwise I think we covered the main good stuff, I think.
Well, we can always enjoy having you back if you've had a good time, that is, to learn more and chat more at some point in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. Gwendolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed. How can our listeners and our viewers get in touch with you if they want to follow up or had further questions or anything of that nature?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter. So at G Seidman PhD. I don't post a lot. It's mostly just psych related things. So if you're interested in psych, then that's where to go. Just sort of relationship, social media stuff, other stuff I think is interesting related to social psych. And then there's also my blog at Psychology Today. If you just Google my name and Psychology Today, you'll find it. And then I'll typically tweet out recent posts. But if you want to look at some of the stuff I've written about some of the topics we talked about today, so if you're interested in that, you can definitely check out the blog there at Site Today.
Fantastic. They're well worth the read, absolutely. Gwendolyn, thank you. We've had a great time.
Thanks. I had a good time as well. It was fun.
Great.